My sister, at her own baby shower, grabbed a cake knife, pointed it at my belly, and shouted, "This is my day." When I told her to relax, she said, "You stole my life and my babies." I didn't respond. That was 9 months ago. Recently, police found a nursery fully set up in a storage unit, with my twins' names painted on the walls. But none of that was where it really began. It started years earlier on the day I walked across the stage at Buffalo University ready to receive my degree when my sister Jessica screamed so loud the entire auditorium went silent. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, and hyperventilating until the ceremony was completely shut down, and paramedics rushed in. Moments like that were her specialty, and everyone knew it. Jessica had always needed the spotlight, even if it meant stealing it from me. When I was 12 and playing my first piano recital, she fainted dramatically in the front row. On prom night when I was crowned queen, she clutched her chest and staged a fake heart attack. Every milestone I ever had somehow turned into her emergency, and I swallowed it for years because that is what our mother Linda taught me to do. Keep the peace and let Jessica have her moments. But 3 years later, when the invitation to her baby shower arrived in the mail, I felt something in me snap into focus. My husband Mark was beside me when I opened it, and without thinking, I leaned into him and whispered that we were trying for a baby now. He looked surprised and said he thought we were waiting, but I told him the timing mattered and it had to be now. I had done the math carefully, and I only had a few cycles to make it happen before her party. And I was done letting her win the first month. The test showed a single line and I stared at it until my eyes burned. The second month was the same, and I cried alone in the bathroom so Mark would not see the panic setting in. Then on the third month, I was lying in a dark exam room with cold gel on my stomach when the ultrasound tech suddenly went quiet. She moved the wand slowly and then smiled and told me congratulations because there were 2 heartbeats. Twins. I laughed out loud because it felt absurd and perfect all at once. From that moment on, I became Jessica's loudest supporter, her biggest cheerleader. I hyped her up online and in person because I wanted her glowing and confident for what she believed would be her moment. I designed countdown posts and shared them daily, telling the world how excited I was for my sister to become a mom. I insisted on inviting everyone I knew to her shower, promising they would bring gifts and attention. And I knew I was right when she posted the baby name she had chosen. The name was Delphine Aurora, a name I had written in my diary when I was 15, a name I had never shared with anyone, not even Mark. My hands shook when I saw it on her page because it meant she had been through my things at some point, digging through my room and my thoughts. And when the morning of the party arrived, I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt while I curled her hair and listened to her talk about how perfect everything was. She got emotional and said that if only one of us could be pregnant, she was glad it was her. She even said that our mother agreed it was better this way, since she was the prettier sister, and the photos would be worth framing. I applied her lipstick carefully and told her she deserved this and that nothing would interrupt her day. She looked at me and said exactly that. This was her death. The party itself was beautiful with balloons everywhere and a towering cake at the center. Even though everyone already knew the baby was a girl, she insisted on doing a full reveal again for the performance. I wore a loose dress, but my bump was there if anyone looked closely. At first no one did, or so I thought, until Jessica pulled our mother aside and whispered loudly about how big I had gotten and joked that someone might think I was the pregnant one. Linda laughed and told her that she had always been the thin one and that it was good for the pictures. When the countdown started and pink confetti exploded, everyone cheered and cameras flashed and I was ready to stand up and say it, ready to ruin the mood completely, but my stomach lurched and the nausea hit so hard I had to run to the bathroom. I came back out, everyone was staring at me with concern, and before I could stop myself the words spilled out that I was sorry and that it was just the twins making me sick. That I was 6 weeks along with twins and could not keep anything down. The silence that followed felt like it pressed against my ears. Then everything exploded. Relatives gasped and rushed toward me, touching my belly and asking questions. The attention shifted like a wave pulling away from Jessica and toward me. I watched her face change color as her chest started heaving and I knew a performance was coming. She clutched her chest and said she could not breathe and that she was having a panic attack and that this was her party. But no one moved because they were all around me. Even her own husband Alex was asking about twin strollers. Jessica screamed for attention again and our mother snapped at her that this was not the time because I was having twins on my first pregnancy. That was when she truly lost control. She grabbed the cake knife and for a split second I thought that was how I would die, right there, among balloons and gifts. She screamed that it was her day and that she had been trying for years while I stole everything. Alex lunged forward and twisted the knife from her hand as her body shook violently. The knife clattered across the floor and disappeared under the dessert table as her legs gave out and she collapsed, wailing so loudly the neighbors could probably hear it. Mascara streamed down her face as she screamed that I had ruined everything, like I always did. Linda rushed to her side and wrapped her arms around Jessica, rocking her back and forth while completely ignoring me, standing there in shock with my hand on my stomach. Phones were out everywhere, recording the meltdown like it was entertainment. Alex finally got her into a chair where she hyperventilated while he whispered to her, trying to calm her down. Mark grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door, asking if I was okay and telling me we needed to leave before things escalated. That was when my mother stormed over and slapped me across the face so hard the sound echoed through the yard. She screamed that I was selfish and could not let my sister have a single day without making it about me. The room went silent except for Jessica's sobbing, and my cheek burned as I touched it in disbelief. Mark stepped between us and told Linda to back off or he would call the police himself. My friend Hannah appeared beside me and loudly said she would call 911 if anyone touched me again. My father Robert finally pushed through the crowd, looking horrified by what he saw. That was when Jessica bent over and vomited all over the floor, and Alex shouted that they needed to go to the hospital because she was having contractions from the stress. Linda pointed at me and screamed that if Jessica lost her baby, it would be my fault. As they helped her toward the car, she turned and screamed that if she lost her baby she would make sure I lost mine too. At least 10 people recorded that threat, and Mark squeezed my hand saying we were filing a police report immediately. We sat in Mark's car while he called the police to report the assault and the threat against our babies. I texted Hannah asking her to save every video she could find from the party while my cheek throbbed and I felt the twins moving wildly inside me. When officers arrived they took statements and watched the footage and photographed my face. They told us to file for a restraining order first thing Monday. Hours later we were home and Mark made me tea while I tried to process how my life had imploded in a single afternoon. He admitted he was scared of what Jessica might do next and suggested staying with his parents. But I refused to be driven out of my own home. My phone exploded with notifications as videos went viral online, and strangers argued over whether I was wrong or Jessica was unstable. And as I sat there shaking, I knew nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The next morning started with the doorbell ringing non-stop like someone was leaning on it without mercy. Mark jumped out of bed and checked the peephole while I stayed frozen under the blankets with my heart racing. Linda stood outside with her face swollen from crying and anger mixed together. She kept pressing the bell and pounding the door with her fist. Mark cracked the door with the chain still on and told her to leave. She immediately shoved her fingers through the gap, trying to force it open while screaming about the videos online and demanding I take them down. Her voice kept rising until it echoed down the hallway as she accused me of ruining Jessica's life and destroying our family. Mark held the door firm and told her she needed to go now. When she started kicking the door and screaming that I was a jealous monster, the neighbors began stepping out to watch. Mrs. Chen from next door stood there recording everything on her phone. Seeing the audience only made Linda louder as she accused me of planning everything to hurt my sister. Mark finally said he was calling the police, and only then did she back away, still shouting threats before disappearing down the hall. An hour later my phone rang and Robert's name lit up the screen. His voice sounded hollow and exhausted as he told me Jessica was still in the hospital under observation, and the doctors were worried about her blood pressure. He begged me to meet as a family before things got worse and said we needed to talk this out. I could hear desperation in his voice, but I told him I would only meet in public and only if Mark came with me. He agreed and suggested a restaurant downtown in 2 days. Those 2 days crawled by with my anxiety tightening around my chest more each hour. I could not stop worrying that the stress was hurting the twins, and by the second night my hands were shaking so badly. Mark insisted we call my doctor. The waiting room was packed when we arrived, and I noticed women staring and whispering while pointing their phones at me. The videos had spread everywhere. Dr. Hernandez finally called me back and did a full ultrasound checking both babies carefully. She said they were okay but warned me that stress like this was dangerous and prescribed something mild for anxiety and told me to avoid any more confrontations at all costs. When the day of the meeting came, we walked into the restaurant and saw Linda, Robert, Jessica and Alex already seated in the back. Jessica looked pale with dark circles under her eyes, but her makeup was perfect. The second we sat down, Linda demanded I apologize and admit I planned everything to hurt Jessica. Jessica dabbed fake tears and said I had always been jealous because she was prettier and more loved. Alex stayed silent but flinched when she said that. Robert tried to calm everyone and suggested moving forward peacefully, but Linda kept cutting him off, raising her voice about how I traumatized her pregnant daughter. Other diners started turning to stare as Jessica suddenly reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it across the table with a smug smile and said she was suing me for emotional distress and endangering her baby. Mark calmly pulled out his phone and called his cousin Emily, who was a lawyer. Jessica's face shifted when she heard him speaking to an actual attorney, and we stood up and left while Linda screamed after us that night. Hannah came over with wine for Mark and ice cream for me. She sat on our couch and showed us something she had been collecting for years without telling me. Screenshots and photos documenting every time Jessica had stolen attention with fake emergencies going back to high school. My graduation, my engagement dinner, even birthdays I had forgotten. Seeing it all laid out made something click into place. A week later, Emily came over to review the lawsuit and laughed as she read it, saying it was frivolous and suggested we countersue for assault and threats since everything was on video. She helped us file for a restraining order, and when we went to court, the judge reviewed the footage and granted a temporary order against both Linda and Jessica, prohibiting them from coming within 500 feet of us and my doctor's office. Linda violated the order within 2 days by showing up at Mark's office screaming at the receptionist until security called the police and arrested Her in front of his coworkers. Mark's boss suggested he worked from home for a while and he set up an office in our spare room. A few nights later I woke up to strange noises outside and peeked through the blinds to see Jessica's car parked just beyond the restricted distance. She sat there staring at our building for hours without moving. The next morning Mark installed security cameras. 2 weeks passed with her parking there almost every night. Robert came by looking wrecked and said Alex was considering divorce because Jessica's obsession with destroying me was affecting her pregnancy and their baby. At my 20-week scan, the tech went quiet and Dr. Hernandez explained one twin was smaller and needed close monitoring. The stress was affecting my baby's growth and I broke down crying in that cold room while Mark held me. That night Hannah called in a panic saying someone had posted my medical information online, including my appointments and ultrasound screenshots. Only someone with hospital access could have done it. Mark called hospital security and Emily said this was a serious federal crime. The next morning, Emily called with shocking news that Robert's wife, Karen, worked in billing and had accessed my records illegally 17 times. Karen was fired immediately and faced charges. Robert showed up devastated saying he had no idea and felt betrayed all over again. Alex texted me next admitting Jessica kept a notebook filled with plans to destroy me dating back years and he was scared for their baby and meeting with a custody lawyer. 3 weeks after the shower, Jessica posted a fabricated story online claiming I stalked her with edited photos and fake messages. Strangers sent me death threats and someone posted our address saying I deserved whatever happened. The FBI opened an investigation while my blood pressure kept climbing and Dr. Hernandez put me on modified bed rest. Trapped at home while lies spread felt unbearable. Hannah documented everything for a defamation case while Mark stayed home caring for me and reading to the twins every night. His voice became my anchor as our world continued to unravel. 2 days later, the police came to our door with updates about Karen. She was being arrested for illegally accessing my medical records and feeding information to Jessica for months. The hospital logs showed she had opened my files again and again. She faced serious federal charges and lost her job immediately. Robert filed for divorce that same day, completely shattered by realizing how deep the betrayal went. The fallout ripped through the family like an earthquake and I watched it all from my bed with my hands resting on my stomach, trying to keep my breathing slow for the twins. A month after the baby shower, a process server showed up with a thick envelope. Jessica was suing both Mark and me, claiming we conspired to ruin her reputation and alienate her family. The amount she demanded was staggering and the legal bills started stacking faster than we could process them. Emily told us to come to her office first thing in the morning and spread out papers across her desk with calm precision. She filed multiple countersuits against Jessica for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress and pressed charges against Linda for the assault. She warned us it would be long and ugly, but we had no choice but to fight back. 2 weeks later, I woke up in the middle of the night with sharp pain tearing through my abdomen. Mark rushed me to the hospital while I gripped the door handle, trying not to panic. The nurses hooked me to monitors, and Dr. Hernandez rushed in half-dressed explaining the twins were far too early to be born. They managed to stop the labor with medication, but kept me hospitalized for days. While I lay there listening to heartbeats, Jessica posted online about karma catching up to me. Alex showed up quietly with flowers hidden under his jacket and apologized for everything. He admitted Jessica refused to take her prescribed medication and he was documenting everything for divorce and custody. 6 weeks after the baby shower, Hannah organized a small support gathering at our house with neighbors and friends bringing food and baby gifts. For the first time since everything exploded, I felt surrounded by care instead of chaos. That calm shattered when Jessica appeared on our lawn screaming that I was turning everyone against her. Hannah tried to guide her away, but Jessica shoved her and then doubled over as fluid spilled onto the grass. Paramedics arrived and she screamed that I caused her early labor. The next morning word spread that she delivered a healthy baby girl. Relief washed over me despite everything. Linda called later with venom in her voice, saying Jessica named the baby Delphina Aurora Sarah, adding my name out of spite. Alex refused to sign the birth certificate and demanded counseling. 2 months after the original shower, Hannah threw me another one at her house, and halfway through opening gifts, a process server arrived again. Jessica was seeking a restraining order against me, claiming I caused her labor. The judge assigned had ties to Linda's church, and despite overwhelming evidence, he granted it. Emily immediately filed for appeal, but it left us trapped and exhausted. Weeks dragged on, filled with paperwork and anxiety as my belly grew heavier and the twins kicked relentlessly. One morning, Hannah brought over a dusty box of childhood photos she had saved years ago. We spread them across the table, and I stared at images of Jessica and me, as children smiling with arms wrapped around each other. Memories of a sister who once loved me. I cried, realizing this was no longer about jealousy but untreated mental illness, consuming everything. That same afternoon, Alex called, saying he filed for emergency custody after finding a notebook where Jessica wrote "Destroy Sarah" over and over, 4 pages. The judge granted it immediately. When officers arrived to serve papers, Jessica grabbed the baby and fled with Linda blocking them. An alert went out statewide, and hours later, police found them at a motel. Both arrested while screaming about persecution. The baby was returned safely to Alex. Emily told us charges were piling up fast and asked if I was prepared to testify even if it meant prison for my mother and sister. Mark squeezed my hand as I said yes. Robert came by later, looking older than I had ever seen him. He apologized for decades of enabling Linda and choosing silence over protection. He admitted he always knew it was wrong and begged forgiveness. Months after the shower, I was in a deposition answering endless questions when labor pains hit again. The contractions were stronger and closer together and I was rushed back to the hospital where doctors barely managed to stop it. The stress was triggering real danger and I was ordered onto strict bed rest. Around the same time, Emily succeeded in having the restraining order against me overturned and new warrants issued against Jessica and Linda for violations. Justice felt close, but my body was failing under the weight of it. Allie spent my days in a sterile hospital room watching monitors while Jessica ranted online about being a victim. Mark brought news one afternoon that his company offered him a transfer to Seattle with a promotion, a chance to leave everything behind. The idea felt terrifying and hopeful at the same time. 2 days later, Jessica showed up at the hospital, screaming that she hoped my babies would die. Security removed her, and Emily added witness intimidation to the charges. Weeks later, Alex came to the hospital window holding his daughter wrapped in pink. He mouthed that he filed for divorce and was moving away to protect her. Emily called the next morning saying the prosecutor was taking over the entire case and combining everything into felony charges. The arraignment aired on the news and I watched as Linda collapsed in court from a heart attack. Despite everything, a strange ache filled my chest. Robert came to my room saying she was critical and asking if I would see her. Against everyone's advice, I agreed, but only with security present. Linda looked small and broken in that bed, surrounded by machines. She cried and admitted she lived through Jessica because she resented that I succeeded without her. The confession did not heal anything, but it cracked something open inside me. Weeks later, news broke that Jessica was diagnosed with severe mental disorders and declared unfit to stand trial. She was committed to a state hospital indefinitely. Karen's case continued alone and she received probation and mandatory therapy. The twins were no longer growing well, and my delivery was scheduled early. The night before surgery, Mark and I promised each other we would break the cycle and give our children peace. The next morning, our son and daughter were born minutes apart, tiny but fierce. Mark cried holding them as I watched my future take its first breaths. They were rushed to intensive care, and my world narrowed to their fragile bodies and steady beeping machines. 3 days after the twins were born, Robert came to visit while they were still in intensive care. He stood by the glass with tears running down his face as he watched them breathe with help from the machines. He told me Linda had been convicted of assault and harassment and received probation with mandatory therapy and a permanent order banning contact with us unless we reached out first. He said she claimed she was finally seeing the damage she had done, but I felt nothing hearing it. A week later, Emily brought mail to the unit while I was holding our son against my chest for skin to skin. My hands shook as I opened a letter from the state hospital where Jessica was being treated. She wrote an apology mixed with claims that the babies were really hers and that fate had stolen them. An hour later, Alex showed up looking hollow and told us Jessica was pregnant again from before their separation. The news crushed him because it meant he would be tied to her forever. The twins stayed in intensive care for weeks, learning to eat and breathe on their own while Hannah visited daily with updates about our move west and photos of a nursery painted soft yellow. With clouds drifting across the ceiling, Emily transferred our restraining orders to Washington, ensuring stronger protections. Once we left Buffalo during the second week, Alex brought his daughter Delphina to the hospital window so she could meet her cousins through the glass. She pressed her tiny hands against it and babbled happily while Alex promised he would keep Jessica far away from us and handle all contact himself. 2 days before discharge, the psychiatric team called with urgent warnings that Jessica had become obsessed with my twins during treatment and believed they were stolen from her. They recommended we leave the state immediately once travel was safe. Exactly 3 weeks after birth, the twins finally reached their weight goals and could regulate their temperature. We packed up quietly and left Buffalo before dawn. Robert handed us a thick photo album filled with childhood pictures and promised to visit once we were settled. On the plane, an older woman smiled at our babies and said we looked like such a calm, happy family, and she had no idea we were escaping a storm. When we landed, my phone filled with messages from Emily saying Jessica had been committed involuntarily for threatening to find us and take what she called her children. Our new house in Seattle was bright and quiet with big windows and a street where nothing ever seemed to happen. Still, every knock made me jump and I checked the locks constantly. Mark found a trauma therapist and insisted we go together. Robert called weeks later, offering to read a letter from Linda apologizing for years of favoritism and competition. I listened in silence and did not respond. 1 month and the twins smiled for the first time during a video call with Hannah, and we all cried at once. Then Emily called with news that made my stomach drop again. Jessica had lost the pregnancy during a psychotic episode where she believed something was inside her that did not belong. She was moved to a long-term facility upstate. Despite everything, I felt sick thinking about her pain and her mind unraveling. Alex moved to Portland with Delphina and his new partner, hoping for a fresh start. Close enough for cousins to know each other but far from Buffalo. 3 months into our new life, final legal papers arrived confirming all charges resolved and restraining orders made permanent. Jessica was declared a danger to herself and others, and institutionalized indefinitely. Returning to work felt surreal, as if I were stepping into someone else's life. My co-workers talked about traffic and deadlines, unaware of the chaos I had fled. During lunch breaks, I pumped milk in the bathroom and scrolled through photos Mark sent of the babies sleeping. My therapist listened patiently when I finally admitted out loud that I had gotten pregnant, partly out of revenge. Not love but spite. She did not judge and told me healing meant facing even the ugliest truths. Months passed and the twins grew stronger and louder. Robert asked to visit for their first birthday and I hesitated, but Mark said yes. Robert arrived with a quilt Linda had made and a small envelope I did not open. He played with the twins gently and left without asking for forgiveness. The quilt stayed in the closet, not discarded but not displayed. Ivahana moved to Seattle for work and became part of our daily life, bringing food and laughter and helping us breathe again. Alex visited with Delphina and his partner, who knew none of the past and treated us like normal family. We built new traditions that did not include screaming or fear. 8 months in, Mark suggested renewing our vows, quietly with only people who truly mattered. We did it in our backyard with the twins chewing on flowers and laughter replacing tension. Months later, a letter arrived from Jessica's doctors asking if we would consider supervised contact in the future. The letter went into a file and stayed there unopened. The twins took their first steps on a rainy afternoon, wobbling toward each other and collapsing in giggles. Mark joked about competition and then corrected himself, saying only kindness would be rewarded in our house. 1 year after the baby shower, I posted a single photo of the twins laughing at the park with a caption about choosing joy and turned off comments. At the playground, Mark pushed the swings while I watched our life unfold in a way I once thought impossible. A stranger commented on how peaceful we looked, and for the first time I believed it. The twins knew nothing of knives or courtrooms, only that their world was safe and filled with love. That knowledge grounded me more than any therapy session ever could. The past still lived in my memories, but it no longer owned my future. We had crossed an ocean of chaos to reach this quiet shore, and I was determined never to let the storm follow us again. Life in Seattle slowly settled into a rhythm that felt almost unreal after everything we had survived. Mornings were filled with bottles and naps and the quiet hum of normalcy. Mark worked from home most days and took breaks just to lie on the floor with the twins, letting them grab his fingers and laugh. I started to trust the silence again, even though part of me stayed alert, like my body had learned that peace could be taken away without warning. Therapy became part of our routine, and each session peeled back another layer of grief, anger, and guilt that I had buried under survival. My therapist reminded me that healing did not mean erasing the past but learning how to live alongside it without letting it control every breath I took. One afternoon, Robert called to tell me that Linda had finally begun attending therapy consistently and had stopped blaming everyone else for what happened. He said she was quieter now and older, somehow like the fight had drained out of her. He did not ask me to forgive her, and I appreciated that more than any apology he could have offered. He said he was learning how to exist without trying to manage other people's emotions, and that was the first time I had ever heard him sound honest about himself. When the call ended, I sat on the couch holding one twin, while the other slept on Mark's chest, and I let myself feel sad for the family we never were, and relieved for the one we had built instead. As the twins grew, they developed wildly different personalities. One calm and observant, the other loud and determined. Watching them discover the world made everything else feel smaller and farther away. Even the memories that once haunted my dreams lost their sharp edges. I still thought about Jessica sometimes, especially at night when the house was quiet. I wondered who she might have been if someone had intervened earlier, or if our family had not rewarded her behavior with attention and excuses. Those thoughts no longer came with the same rage, just a dull ache for a sister I lost long before the knife ever appeared. Emily stayed in touch and kept us updated on the legal aftermath back in New York. She told us that Jessica remained in treatment and that progress came in waves, some weeks calm, others chaotic. She said the doctors believed long-term structure was her only chance at stability. Alex was granted full custody of Delphina and moved forward with his life slowly and cautiously. Hearing that gave me a strange sense of closure, knowing at least one child had been pulled out of the wreckage before it could swallow her whole. Mark and I talked openly about how we would handle questions when our twins were older and curious about extended family. We agreed honesty mattered, but so did timing, and safety work became easier as I found my footing again. I stopped flinching at loud noises and stopped checking the locks quite so often. One evening after putting the twins to bed, Mark and I sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange and purple, and he asked me if I ever regretted the choices that started everything. I thought about it carefully and told him the truth, that regret was complicated. Because while my motives had been messy, the outcome was these two lives asleep inside behind us. He squeezed my hand and said that growth came from owning our shadows, not pretending they never existed. That was when I realized how much we had both changed through the fire. The therapist encouraged me to write letters I would never send to release what I still carried inside. I wrote one to Linda and one to Jessica and one to my younger self, who had learned too early how to shrink to keep others comfortable. I cried through most of it but felt lighter afterward, like something old had finally been set down. I did not need closure from them anymore because I had learned how to give it to myself. The twins learned new words every week and their laughter filled spaces that once held fear. Sometimes I would catch Mark watching them with this look of quiet wonder, like he still could not believe we had made it through on the anniversary of the baby shower. Hannah came over with cupcakes and no explanation. We let the twins smash frosting into their hair and took pictures that felt completely different from anything we had documented before. There was no tension, no audience, no one waiting for something to go wrong. Later that night, after Hannah left, I sat alone scrolling through old photos on my phone and realized how far away that woman felt. The one standing frozen in a backyard with a hand on her belly and terror in her eyes. I whispered a thank you to her for surviving long enough to become who I was now. A few weeks later, a certified letter arrived forwarded by Emily, with an update from the court system confirming that all outstanding matters involving Linda and Jessica were closed and finalized. There would be no more appeals, no more hearings, no more surprises. I placed the letter in a folder and tucked it away without rereading it. That chapter was done even if the scars remained. That night Mark suggested we take a weekend trip to the coast. Just the four of us, and the idea felt daring and freeing at the same time. We packed up the car and drove west until the city disappeared behind trees and water stretched endlessly in front of us. At the beach, the twins toddled in the sand, squealing every time a wave crept too close. Mark chased them and pretended to be eaten by the ocean, and their laughter echoed over the wind. I sat back and watched my family exist without fear or performance, and felt something close to peace settle into my chest. For the first time in my life, I was not bracing for interruption or disaster. I was simply present. That moment felt like a promise to myself that I would protect this life fiercely, without apology. Months later, another letter arrived from the treatment facility, asking again about supervised contact with Jessica. I read it this time slowly and carefully. I did not feel anger, just clarity. I wrote back a brief response, thanking them for the update and stating that contact was not something I could consider at this stage. It was the first boundary I had ever set without guilt or justification. When Mark asked how I felt afterward, I told him I felt strong and sad and whole, all at once. He nodded, like he understood completely. As the twins approached another birthday, Robert visited again, this time with less hesitation and more warmth. He stayed in a hotel nearby and did not overstep. He listened more than he spoke, and watched the twins play with a soft smile. When he left, he hugged me gently and said he was proud of the woman I had become. It was not the validation I needed, but it was meaningful in its own way. After he drove off, I realized I no longer needed to carry the weight of fixing anyone else. The twins grew into their personalities, and our home grew louder and messier and happier. There were tantrums and sleepless nights and moments where Mark and I snapped at each other from exhaustion. But even in those moments, there was safety and mutual respect. We argued without fear of escalation, and made up without manipulation. Those were things I once believed were impossible for me. Therapy helped, but love practiced daily made the difference. One quiet evening, after the twins were asleep, I sat at my desk journaling when I came across the words I had written months earlier about emptiness and guilt. I realized they no longer rang true. There was accountability, yes, and grief and regret for the pain caused. But there was also forgiveness for myself, and the understanding that healing was not linear or clean. It was messy and ongoing, and deeply human. I closed the notebook and went to sit beside Mark on the couch, resting my head on his shoulder, feeling grounded and safe. Years from now, I know the twins will ask questions and we will answer them honestly and gently. They will know that families can fracture and still choose healthier paths. They will know that love is not proven through sacrifice of self, but through protection of peace. They will know that their story began in chaos but was shaped by intention and courage. And they will know that they were wanted fiercely and loved without conditions. A warm afternoon at the park. Mark pushed the swings while I sat on the grass watching our children reach for the sky. A stranger smiled at us and commented on how joyful they looked. I smiled back and agreed, because this joy was earned and protected and real. For the first time, I was not afraid of being seen. I was simply living, and that was more than enough.